Hello everyone and welcome back. My name is Greg Furman, market analyst here at TraderPlanet.com, and this is the Forex market outlook for the week of April the 19th, 2010. So with that, let's get started as we usually do here with the US dollar index. We've had a very good trading week, a very busy week with a somewhat volatile end to the week with the Goldman Sachs problems and things like that. Now this is going to cause some volatility, I believe, but again, this is a good example of market noise. The primary trends are still in place, and I'm going to go through that with the number of different commodities and equities, and of course the US dollar. So let's have a look at the US dollar index to see where we're at to begin the week. We can see that the triple EMA crossover has crossed to the downside. However, in very close proximity to this crossover to the upside, which again was only about a week and a half ago. Excuse me, the crossover on there was about a week ago. Now about the middle of March, we had this crossover to the upside. So what I'm saying here is this close proximity suggests that this crossover to the downside is corrective in nature. So let's go in and have a look at the crossovers and we'll see what's happening. Now the short-term crossover from Vantage Point we can see here has very clearly crossed to the upside. Now what I'm going to do at this point in time is we're going to very quickly look at the medium and long-term crossover, but I can tell you that they're still showing a downward move. They have not made their cross. Now there's quite a gap here in the medium term, and the long term I'm suggesting is going to be pretty much the same, if not a little worse. So the long term we can see this big gap here. This crossover is still to the downside. However, again, the short-term crossover from Vantage Point is to the upside. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to leave the short-term crossover on the US dollar index, and we're going to go in here and pull up some of the other markets from Vantage Point. Now these other, in my opinion, are critical markets that Vantage Point forecasts, and they forecast them very accurately. Now looking at the crude oil contracts versus the US dollar, we're going to hit the short-term crossover, and we're going to hit apply to all, just so everybody can see this. Now with this crossover to the upside on the US dollar index, we have a crossover right here to the downside on crude oil contracts. Now looking at the S&P 500, we can see here that we do not have a crossover in the short term. Now again, my viewpoint has been all along for months now that we continue to buy the S&P 500 on dips. Again, these calls were made back in the 1050 area. We're now at 1200, so Vantage Point's done a very good call of guiding me to advise to say we're going to continue to buy contracts on the S&P 500 despite the stronger dollar, despite weaker, stronger commodities, the seesaw back and forth with the commodities, but I'll touch base on that too. But for now, we can see that the US dollar index has crossed to the upside. We've got some volatility on S&P 500, but we do not have a crossover to the downside. Now looking at gold contracts, we can see that we have a very strong move to the downside on this short-term crossover. Again, the correlation between the US dollar and the gold contracts is still very evident. So that's something we want to continue to watch and see how this progresses. Now for now, what we can surmise from this is that the US dollar is going to move higher, gold is going to move lower, crude oil is going to move lower. However, our S&P 500 contract, which I'm using to gauge a broader range of stock indices, is still going to hold its value despite the issues that we're obviously going to be facing with Goldman to start the week. But again, the thing with Goldman, strictly market noise. I don't believe that that's going to have any real long-lasting impact, and any move lower on that S&P 500 we should be using as an opportunity to get into buy positions. Now, while we have this short-term crossover up, I also want to take the opportunity to look at the Euro FX futures contracts and the Japanese yen futures contracts. We're going to be doing this a little differently this week so we can show that the strong correlation here. We've got the US dollar again crossing to the upside. We have the Euro FX futures contracts now crossing to the downside. So again, this suggests that the euro is going to come under further pressure. I fully anticipate that this will happen. Euro US will move lower. Euro yen is likely to move lower. A number of those euro-based pairs are probably going to move lower as the US dollar regains its footing. Now, looking at the Japanese yen futures contracts, we can see that this picture here, the correlation is positive. As the US dollar strengthens, we're also seeing a buy signal on the Japanese yen currency futures. So when we have the US dollar against the euro, we can see the inverse correlation, the negative correlation, where the euro moves down, the US dollar moves up. But in this particular case, we can see that the Japanese yen and the US dollar are actually moving higher together. So using these short-term crossovers from Vantage Point, we're better able to identify what's actually happening. Now, again, one of the other commodities that I do like to monitor using the Vantage Point software is the RBOB unleaded gasoline contracts. Now, we can see that they're also starting to turn negative also. So when they're turning negative, the commodities in general are turning negative. The yen is turning positive. The US dollar is turning positive. However, the euro and some of the other major currency futures are actually turning lower. So with that said, we're going to take that very useful information and apply that to our different markets. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to move into our individual currency pairs, starting with the Australia US dollar. Now, with the Australia US dollar, we can see that the short-term crossover from Vantage Point has moved to the downside. Now, looking at this, however, from the triple EMA's perspective, we want to identify areas of dynamic support and resistance. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this up so everybody can see this. We're now sitting at a major level on Australia US. 92.42 is the 18-day predicted moving average from Vantage Point, which we can see that I'm clearly using as pivot support. My position is with that short-term crossover that the Australia US dollar is going to come under further pressure. We can see that the predicted 3-day moving average from Vantage Point at 92.92, 92.86 on the 8-day, and again 92.42 on the 18-day. I'm suggesting that any move towards this 92 area, 92.90, 92.70 area, that we use that area to set shorts on any type of recovery. So we've closed the week at 92.45, slight move higher on Sunday night towards that 92.70, 92.80 area. We can use that to get into short positions. Now, another reason that I'm saying that even though what I'm suggesting is counter trend, we're going to pull up the predicted RSI and the predicted TSI from Vantage Point. Now, with the predicted TSI and the predicted RSI, the predicted TSI is an indicator that can only be found on the Vantage Point software. This crossover has taken place to the downside in heavily overbought territory. Predicted RSI also moving lower, but the predicted TSI is the leading indicator here, suggesting that Australia US is getting ready for a bigger move down. Now, we've had this indicator, it's been up in this overbought territory for about the last almost the last month now, but again, this crossover to the downside could be very significant. We also have the 3-day crossing over the 8-day, another leading indicator from Vantage Point that this thing is going to move lower. So with Australia US to start the week, we're looking to get into those short positions. Now, next up, we've got the US-Japan currency pair. Now, we've gone through the review here. We can see that the dollar and the Japanese yen are actually strengthening together here. Now, we've cleared this major support level from Vantage Point at 92.78. We've got 92.71 and 93.01 all now clearly pivot resistance because we've closed below it at the 92.12 area. We've got the 3-day crossing over the 8-day and the 18-day predicted moving average. Now, going in and having a look at the multiple crossovers from Vantage Point, the short term is pretty much a no-brainer here. We can see that that's made an aggressive move, but that short-term crossover actually took place at the beginning of the month. Now, going into the medium-term crossover from Vantage Point, we can see that this crossover on the medium term has taken place again about the 10th of April. Now, looking at the long-term crossover, which takes a little bit longer for the long term to put out that